Hey, what's going on everyone, and welcome back to the Bimmer Barn. Today we have got part 2 of this E39 Wagon restoration mini-series, and I hope you guys are enjoying the content so far. Today we're going to be doing the power steering system overhaul and replacing all of the leaking hoses as well as the reservoir itself, and then we're going to work into the transmission and pull down the filter and inspect the overall condition and then get ready to fill this thing with fluid. So I hope you guys are enjoying so far, and without further ado, let's go ahead and get straight into the video. So if you didn't see in the last episode, we did the cooling system overhaul as well as replacing all of the drive belt pulleys and all those tensioners as well. And today we're going to be focusing on the power steering system. Of course, we have to start off the video with a little look at Goose, who's just enjoying his tennis ball right here. But the power steering system is something that you see commonly leaking on these older cars, and in this particular scenario I saw that the fluid in the system was brand new, but the hoses all looked old. So that told me that there was a pretty consistent leak coming from this system, and that's why we went and replaced all of the hoses on the system as well as the reservoir itself, because it has a filter. Now the ATF fluid that we decided to go with is the Dexron 3 fluid, and this is approved for the power steering systems on these older cars. Of course, nowadays you can upgrade if you'd like and go to CHF 11S, which is a little more expensive of a fluid, but today we're going to stick with the traditional ATF fluid. So let's go ahead and start dismantling all the hoses, and that way we'll be able to start replacing them with the new ones. So I'm about to pop off the power steering lines that go to the cooler in the front of the car, and you're going to see what I'm talking about when I say that this fluid is brand new that's in the steering system. And usually the only reason you would see new fluid in a power steering system is because of two reasons. One is that you replaced a hose and that you now had to install fresh fluid in the system, which is not the case here, being that all the hoses are original. Or two, the power steering system leaks so much fluid that you constantly have to put fresh fluid in it. And that's what I think was happening here, was that the previous owner was having it regularly maintained, but maybe not replacing the hoses as they were leaking. So we're going to go ahead and remove this power steering reservoir and go ahead and throw it in the trash. And now we can clean things up a little bit and turn our attention to the hoses that are still attached to the power steering rack. Now these two hoses are some of the hardest things to capture on video. I'll go ahead and put a little arrow to show them here. But one of them is a 19mm and the other one is 22mm. Now, as part of my socket set, I don't have a 22mm socket, so I ended up using a 7/8 inch drive socket for that banjo bolt. But the other end of the pressure line goes to the pump right here, and that's held on by a 17mm nut. So we're gonna go ahead and break it loose actually from the bottom, and then we're gonna remove it, and then the other end of that goes to our power steering rack. So this pressure line is probably the most expensive line that you'll find on the steering system, but it's worth it to change it, as obviously this thing endures the most abuse. Now, like I said, it's a 22mm banjo bolt on the larger steering line, and then it's a 19mm on the smaller one. You just go ahead and break those free. I like to use a wobble extension, which makes it really easy to get at from up top, and then you can loosen the banjo bolt by hand and pull it off pretty easily. So now this pressure line is just held in by the remaining 10mm nut that holds it to the bracket on the subframe here. So if we remove that, we can go ahead and get this old steering line out of the way, throw it in the trash, and start installing our new pressure line and all the new power steering lines as well. So now we can go ahead and install our new power steering reservoir, and we're going to install the supply line that goes to the pump as well. And what's nice is that the kit from FCP Euro does come with new hose clamps to use for this particular line, so that's nice. But then I noticed that it does not come with the hose clamp to install to the line that goes to the power steering cooler itself. So I'm not sure if I lost it in the box or something, but I ended up using one from my box, and that's no problem. We go ahead and install those two clamps, and then we can install the lines on the cooler itself, and then we'll be done with this part of the build. Now I know things are still a little dirty here in the engine bay, but don't worry, because in the next and final episode we will clean up the engine bay and make it look like brand new. But now we're going to go ahead and turn our attention to the transmission. Now although this thing does only have 73,000 miles, I figured that due to the age and probably the way the car was driven, it'd be in the best interest of the transmission to do a fluid change early on. So that's what we're going to do here, and you can see that the hardware on the transmission is a little rusty, so that just shows some of the age of this car. But we're going to start by dropping the fluid drain plug, and that is a 6mm hex-headed bolt. Now you see the transmission fluid has this kind of weird green tint to it, and it's a little bit shiny, kind of has a metallic feel to it, but we're not going to read too much into things. Let's go ahead and pull the pan down. Now to do this, I went and put the seal plug back into the pan so that way it wouldn't be dripping on me while I was underneath it. And then using a T27, or I think maybe a T30 driver, went ahead and pulled all those screws out, and that way we could pull the pan down. Now here I'm using a sharp razor blade to peel off this old green gasket. It's kind of made out of paper plastic material, so it's pretty difficult to remove from the transmission, but if you can just get underneath it, it doesn't require a lot of scraping. You can kind of pull it off in some places, and just make sure that you have a really clean surface for when you reinstall the transmission sump later on. Now everything looked good here in the transmission, so after we pull off the old fluid filter, we can go ahead and replace it with the new one and then get started on reinstalling the transmission pan. But first, we're gonna go ahead and clean that thing before we get it back on the car. So you'll see that the transmission pan has all these smaller magnets, and these are basically to capture some of the iron that gets deposited into the fluid from the transmission doing all the shifting and such. And so we're going to go ahead and clean these magnets actually by removing them from the pan itself, cleaning the transmission pan. We're going to pressure wash the outside as well as the inside to remove any of the buildup of old grease on the transmission pan itself. And then we'll clean the magnets and reinstall them back inside, so that way they can continue to serve their function inside of the transmission. Now I like to get all the bolts snugged up to the transmission pan using my drill, and then I'll come back around with my torque wrench set to 10 Newton meters and go ahead and make sure that every single bolt is torqued to spec. So once you've got the entire transmission pan done, you can go ahead and turn to the filling of the fluid into the transmission, and we're going to go ahead and use my Schwaben universal filler system to do that. So I'll put a link to this in the description down below, but I've used this filler system for a ton of different jobs, usually for brake bleeding procedures, but also you can use it to fill transmissions and differentials and such. So we're gonna go ahead and put our ATF6 fluid inside of this thing and then use it to pump it into the transmission. Now remember, you have to fill this when the engine is running, so we can't do that until the next episode when we do get the car started. But for now, we're gonna go ahead and just put a couple of quarts in there. So that's going to conclude our video for today. I hope you guys enjoyed watching. In the next episode, we're going to finally get this thing running. We have to replace the fan clutch, which is currently on the way, and we should have it at our door in the next day or so. So we'll replace the fan clutch as well as the radiator expansion tank, and then we're going to get this car started up. We're going to go through the proper fluid filling procedure for the transmission, clean up the engine bay, and then finally take this thing for a drive, and I'll give you guys my overall thoughts on this car. So like I said, I hope you guys are enjoying so far. Be sure to leave a like or a comment down below if you love that E39 content, and subscribe to the channel if you're new and you haven't yet. As always, I hope everyone has an awesome day, and we'll see you next time.